I'm a security guard. I work at a hospital in an abandoned wing from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and have nearly no human interaction except for the relief officer that comes for me at 1 a.m. so I can get lunch. I have worked this post for over a year and a half now and have heard and seen things that have made many other officers turn tails and quit. The first encounter I wish to tell you about wasn't so much scary as it was breathtaking. It also didn't happen at my usual spot, but while on lunch walking back through the ER main hallway. I had just been relieved and was exiting the elevator on the first floor near ER admittance. And as anyone who's ever worked or been at a hospital knows, they are always busy 24/7. Doctors are always rushing this way and that, pushing patients by on beds and wheelchairs. Well, this night was different, and even as the bright hospital lights bounced off the white sterile walls, an uneasiness came over me. It wasn't until I was in the middle of the corridor that I realized what was wrong. It was quiet. There were no doctors around, no patients, and no noise, not even coming from the other rooms I passed by. So naturally, I was relieved when I heard the automatic click of a door coming from behind me and turned around to smile at whoever was entering. What I experienced next I cannot properly describe, no matter how hard I try and remember. My mind shuts out certain details when I try and bring them up. Out from behind the door steps a woman. Almost a girl, but not quite. She was either 19 or 22, wearing a hospital gown and carrying her IV with her. What struck me, though, was that she was and is the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on. Slender build, but not too much. Long flowing hair, I can't remember if it was black or blonde, and her eyes, which locked with mine the moment I turned around, were blue and yellow, with the look of the sun reflected on the ocean. She limped towards me and I couldn't move even as she came closer. I wanted to say something to talk to her. Hell, I wanted to pick her up and kiss her, but she limped right past me. I finally moved to watch her continue and noticed the blood running down her gown. The blood was coming from her mouth. My immediate thought was that she's bleeding internally with an ulcer or some other stomach damage, and I went into guard mode, and I felt my body come to life again. I lifted my hand and shouted, "Wait!" But my shout came to a whimper as she turned around. When she turned around, her mouth was slacked, but her beauty was still there. And the last thing I managed to say to her was, "Let me get you a doctor, please." In what must have been a whisper at that point, even my voice was cracking. She smiled at me and took a step forward as the automatic click of the door behind me opened. I looked towards the sound and saw the doctor pushing the patient in. Looked back and she had disappeared. No blood on the ground, nothing. Like she'd never been there. I've never seen her again. When she looked at me, though her slacked jaw opened, blood pouring from her mouth, I wasn't afraid. I was overwhelmingly sad and worried for her well-being. This concludes my first encounter. I apologize, it isn't frightening, but it is true. I will continue with another encounter tomorrow night. Last night I told you about the woman in white, as I like to call her, but this is just the beginning of the strange events that have happened to me while working at this hospital. For tonight's post, I'm going to need to explain the floor plan of the hospital. Inside the hospital, there are 4 main elevators, one at each end of the hospital. Both of these only go up to the 3rd floor, and 2 near the center that go up to the 6th floor in the basement. These elevators are labeled A through D, A and D being on opposite ends of the hospital. This layout makes it easy for patients and guests to find and navigate the hallways. And now I'll tell you why I don't use them anymore. The elevators have always been creepy. White linoleum, aluminum railings, and lights that flicker whenever they start up. I didn't notice how creepy they were for a long time, though. When a coworker pointed out the elevator doors always opened, and would on their own sometimes. Even so, I never let it bother me. I usually used elevator D to go up to the ICU and chat with some of the nurses before taking C all the way back to my post on the 6th floor, and had never had a problem with it. One night, I want to say about 2 months into the job, I had just gotten cleared to head down and grab my lunch, but when I arrived at the main floor, they had placed construction barriers between where I got off and the cafeteria. This wasn't a problem, though. So I jumped back on the elevator, went up a floor, and made a detour back down to elevator A, where I could get off and get to the cafeteria. I got my lunch and was headed back up to elevator A. As I walked up to the elevator, the doors clicked and opened. The sound startled me, but I brushed it off and walked in, pressing the button to go up to the next floor so I could take elevator C back up to my post. The elevator clicked and hummed as the doors closed, and I could feel the motor pulling me up to the next floor. So I closed my eyes and relaxed for a moment, until I heard the click of the doors open. I opened my eyes and was greeted by the cold air of the basement in front of me. Still confused, I took a step outside the elevator, thinking no way. I had taken elevator A. It didn't even lead to the basement. I even felt the elevator lifting to the next floor. I was shaken out of my stupor, though, by the sound of heavy footsteps heading towards me from down the pitch-black hallway to my left. Fear had gripped me well before I heard those steps, but when I heard the elevator begin to close behind me, I nearly lost it. I turned faster than I thought possible and gripped the doors, squeezing myself back into the elevator before it finally clicked close again. Inside, I frantically pressed the button for the main floor, and when the doors opened to fluorescent white lights and sterile halls of the main floor, I felt like I would cry. I was so happy I almost didn't notice I had come out through elevator D on the opposite side of the hospital. I only take the stairs now. This will be my last post till Saturday. Today is my Friday. I have quite a few more of my own experiences from this post and even more from others, so I hope to be able to write even more this weekend. It's Saturday, and that means I'm back, till Wednesday, with more tales of the strange and unexplainable events that go on within the walls of this hospital. Now, I mentioned before the wing I work in the comments, but never really gave you an idea of what it's really like up here on the 6th floor. The wing I work in is, to my knowledge, an abandoned ICU and our ICU. It was up for remodeling and had already been taken half apart before the hospital abandoned it for newer equipment and a better care unit on the 3rd floor. There are abandoned 2x4s and tool sets, as well as rooms only held together by the skeleton framework. And just like the rest of the hospital, there is one long hallway going down the center. My desk is at the end of this hallway on the easternmost side. It's a small little alcove cut into the wall in the shape of a half octagon. At my desk I have a mag light, radio, paper and pencil, and the only working overhead lamp on the floor. I also keep my phone and a charger that works in a nearby outlet. To the left and right of my desk are 2 halls leading into the ICU, and ahead of my desk is the RICU, all completely submerged in darkness, except for the little light that would come in at the boarded-up windows in the patient rooms or from the light at my desk. Now, with this all understood, I will try my best as usual to explain one of the first events that happened to be posted on this floor of the hospital. I enjoy my rounds. They get me up and moving and help keep me awake through the massive paperwork I usually have to fill out. Tonight was different, though. I had finished up my paperwork early, and it was about 2:30 a.m., which was really odd for me. I usually procrastinate a lot more, so all I had left to do was a floor check every 30 minutes, which was fine. It just meant time would drag on while sitting at my desk. 30 minutes go by and I'm up. I head down the north-facing ICU, shining my mag light into each room, while humming the Andy Griffith Show theme to myself before heading back to go up the south side. I turned a hall and headed back towards my desk to go down to the south-facing ICU. But when I turned the corner, I flinched. The light on my desk had gone out, and what was usually the brightest lit area of my rounds was now the darkest, having no windows around to let in any sort of light. Taken aback but not shaken, I continued forward to my desk. But when I arrived to flip the switch back on, it wouldn't turn on. I called dispatch to report the malfunction, but they said the earliest it could be repaired was that afternoon. Now I was more pissed than frightened, but couldn't do anything about it. So instead of bitching to myself, I finished up my round and came back to sit at my now almost pitch-dark desk. Within minutes of sitting at my desk, I heard it. A drip noise, like someone had left water running. I ignored it at first, but then my eyes started to play tricks on me. I would see a shadow, then shake my head and it would be gone. And still the dripping persisted. My head started to hurt and the persistent noise was beginning to give me a migraine. So I got up before it would become too much for my head to handle and went to see if I could shut it off. I headed down the hallway in front of me, in the general direction of where I thought it was coming from. I walked past the elevators and into the RICU. The sound got louder and more persistent with every turn until it hurt to walk, and my head hurt so much that every shadow on the wall looked threatening. I finally got to the room where I thought the sound was coming from. It was the shower that patients would use during their stay. My head at this point felt like it was going to explode as I twisted the door handle and let myself in. The moment I opened the door, the noise stopped. It was like vice grip had been released from my head, and I stepped in. The second I stepped in, the door shut behind me with a slam. I dropped my light and it went out. Then came the laughter. It wasn't children, no. It was the laughter of teenagers, the same you'd hear outside. if your house was getting egged or teepeed. That laughter you hear when a group of people know they are doing something cruel but are enjoying it. I grab up my light and shine it only to have it immediately flicker and die on me. The moment the light had flickered, I had seen all I needed to see anyways. In front of me stood a group of what looked like teenagers, haggard and skinny to bone, long hair matting and covering most of their faces except the grin, their yellowed and rotted grin. My brain didn't function at this point. I grabbed the door out of instinct and pulled and scrapped, kicking it, shouting, punching it until my knuckles bled. The whole time, the things behind me laughed and grabbed at me. I elbowed and fought until one knocked me down and they started beating and tearing into my skin. The last thing I remember is being repeatedly kicked in the face. Then I woke up at my desk. I hadn't been hurt, but I was sweating and had a terrible chill. I checked the time. It was 2:30. I had 30 minutes until my next floor check and everything was fine. It took me a while to calm down still, and I figured I must be sick with the amount of sweat and the chills I kept getting. But even so, I'd been sicker and still completed the job. So when 30 minutes passed, I got up and did my floor checks. It felt normal besides feeling sick, and I was headed back to the south facing ICU again, when I noticed the light had gone out at my desk. I walked to the stairs and went down to the main floor, where I promptly vomited and collapsed in the main hall. I woke up in a hospital bed with a pounding headache. My supervisor and a doctor are looking over me. My supervisor asked if I was all right and said that my shift had been covered for the rest of the night, but not to come to work that sick again before leaving. The doctor explained that I had some serious cuts and bruises from when I collapsed, but that he couldn't explain how it had actually gotten there. He asked if I had fallen down the stairs as well before getting to the main floor, because I looked like I had been beaten. I got 2 weeks sick leave before coming back. It's happened a few more times where the light has gone out above my desk, sometimes while I'm sitting there, sometimes while doing my rounds. Whenever I see it, I leave and call for a bathroom break. It's always back on when I come back up. Tonight I will not be talking about my experience, but the sad tale of one of my supervisors, a close friend of mine. For name's sake, I will call him Eric. Eric was a portly man, always smiling and joking about something. He was the kind of guy that would spend half his paycheck feeding the less fortunate around the hospital, and made sure everyone felt safe and comfortable while he was around. I'd known Eric since I started working as a guard. We actually started around the same time, and we competed a lot. He eventually got the better of me and became shift supervisor, because he would work other locations, not just the hospital. I didn't hold it against him. He earned it, and I've never really minded my post. Like I said earlier, though, he was posted at locations other than the hospital, one of which was a small broken-down motel on the bad part of an already bad town. He would tell me how he would hear gunshots and fighting all the time, and how he had to hide more than once so he could call the police about trouble. We are told to observe, report, and not interfere unless absolutely necessary, or our lives are in immediate danger. One day, Eric came up to me and said he was going to quit. He couldn't deal with what had been going on at the post. Apparently, one of the motel guests that had been coming for a long time had been a serial rapist, and Eric had never noticed, even though he had waved and had conversations with the man. He told me how he had stumbled upon the first body, a girl no older than 10, naked and lifeless in a ditch outside the man's room. A trail of blood leading towards the man's door. He walked towards the door to find it opened with the smell of feces, blood, and death wafting out. He described it as the most revolting mixture of iron and rot he had ever smelt. Holding his breath, he opened the door to find at least 10 children, some dead and some barely clinging to life, starving, bleeding, and infected. The girl had used the last of her energy to break the lock on the shitty motel's door, attempting to escape, but had fallen and died only moments before Eric had arrived. He called the police, and ambulances arrived on the scene to take the children to the hospital where we worked. The man that did this was gone, and he wasn't found again, despite Eric's best descriptions. Then, to add to his feelings of failure, the children that he saved all died at the hospital due to complications. I talked with Eric at lunch that night, for the last time. He didn't show up at the office in the morning, and his body was later discovered in the basement. He had hung himself during his routine patrols in the basement. He couldn't handle what had happened, and I guess I didn't pick up on what he meant. I don't blame myself for not seeing it, but I do miss my friend, and sometimes when on patrol in the basement late at night, I swear I hear one of his stupid jokes followed by the laughter of children, but when I turn, there's no one there.